I had been married for 11 years when I discovered that my wife had been cheating on me. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt before and left me seething with anger. But then something inside me changed. That anger slowly turned into revenge. It was a cold and calculated plan that I concocted in the days and weeks after our divorce. I knew that revenge was the only way to get some closure. But I also wanted her to feel the pain of how badly she hurt me. My wife worked as a dog groomer. She made pretty good money and I worked as a store manager for Staples. I didn't make as much as my wife, but I did okay. I also owned a few homes as investment properties. My dad and I were partners in this business venture. I thought our marriage was solid. We went to movies together and tried out different restaurants, weekend getaways. You name it. Now, my wife was really big into tech. But when we first met, she really wasn't on her phone a lot. I could count on both hands how many times she was on her phone when we were spending quality time together. Even when she started her dog grooming business, her phone use wasn't really a concern. When her business really took off, her phone use increased, but it was to be expected. And I was okay with it. Her day would start around 9 a.m. with clients. And when she came home, even after 8 p.m. or so, she would still get the occasional text from a client, or some of her clients would recommend her, and she would get calls and text messages from them as well. I was happy for her and she was excited. Well, some of those clients were more than just clients. It all started about 11 months after her business started to become really successful. When she was walking around the house, she always had her phone in her hand, something that she rarely did most of the time. She would just lay her phone down somewhere. And when she heard a ping, she would retrieve it, but then it started to manifest late into the night, which was suspicious, and I didn't waste any time confronting her about it. I asked her one night while we were lying in bed, why was she on her phone so late at night? I told her it was suspicious. Then she handed me her phone, which was a surprise, and told me to go through it. Then she turned over and went to sleep. After that, I felt like a dumbass because I didn't find anything. I felt guilty for not trusting my wife, but her phone use late into the night didn't dwindle after that. It stayed the same and I didn't question her about it. One day after work, I went to my dad's house. My dad and I are pretty close, and I told him about my concerns about my wife's extended phone use late into the night. My dad tells me, if you suspect something, investigate it first. If you can then talk to her about it, ask her to explain only when you have found something to back up your suspicions. My dad was right. I had to dig as much as I could discreetly. I looked over her social media profiles and checked the phone bill, but nothing concrete on the phone bills. I saw a few numbers that looked like she was communicating with quite a bit, but they didn't pan out over the next 30 days. More of the same, but it was getting worse with the phone. Now she was on it while we were watching a movie, eating dinner at a nice restaurant. And even when we would take a day trip somewhere when she wasn't working. So I made the choice of hiring a private investigator to pick up where I left off. I didn't find much. So I turned everything over to him. I wasn't going to drag this out. I need to put my mind at ease. I gave the private investigator everything: the kind of car she drove, some of her clients, addresses, and her most frequent clients. Meanwhile, I continued to play the role of the supportive, attentive husband. Well, about 3 weeks later, I got a call from the private investigator. He indicated he had a whole lot to show me. I immediately made an appointment to go see him after work one evening. What he showed me shocked me beyond belief. The surveillance showed my wife in one instance waiting for a guy's wife to leave the house. They were a client and they had dogs. But when this guy's wife left, my wife walked up to him and kissed him. They both looked around to make sure no one saw them kissing. She wasn't done. She did the same thing with another client. But this time this guy's wife would travel and leave for weeks on end. My private investigator was a beast, and he didn't even charge me for the extra work that was conducted. He didn't just do surveillance on my wife. He also had one of his other guys do some surveillance on both of the men. My wife was fooling around with, turns out they both were seeing other women besides my wife. After seeing all of this, I was absolutely heartbroken and angry. At the same time, I had the private investigator compile all the evidence and prepare a couple of copies for me. I immediately contacted an attorney and made an appointment to see what divorce would look like. For me, we were married in Mississippi, and the lawyer told me I could file for divorce on the basis of adultery. He also told me I could sue my wife's affair partners as well. We started talking about finances. I told him my dad and I owned a few rental homes and I have a full-time job and not counting the rental income. I made about $60,000 per year. My wife was going into the second year of her business and she made about $90,000 per year. I told the lawyer I wanted alimony if I can get it and half of the equity in the home we owned. After getting the divorce process started, I immediately went home and packed some things. My wife wasn't home, and at this point, I didn't give a damn where she was. I immediately told my dad I was moving into one of the vacant homes we owned. He was shocked to say the least. He asked why. And I told him my wife was cheating on me. It sounded like my dad was crying when he said, "Son, I am so sorry to hear that." After speaking to my dad, I made some changes to some of my finances that involved her. I closed 2 credit cards that I had, and she was an authorized user, and I removed her as a beneficiary from my insurance policy at work. We only had one joint bank account together in which we carried a small balance. The rest of our accounts stayed separate for the most part. I never went back to the house after I found out she was cheating on me. She was relentless in trying to talk to me, and I never responded to any of her text messages or phone calls. One day while I was leaving work, I see her car parked in the parking lot. She gets out and approaches me. I threw my hands up and told her to get the fuck away from me. "I don't have anything to say to you." You should have seen the look on her face. She promptly gets in her car and leaves. About 3 weeks later, she was served with the divorce papers. Then she started sending me nasty text messages telling me she was glad she cheated on me. I was boring. I wasn't a real man, but I didn't say anything, and I didn't retaliate over text, but I had plans for her at the divorce hearing. I was awarded $900 a month in alimony for 5 years. When we sell the house, we would split the equity, which will probably be at least $70,000 apiece. Now it was time for my revenge. Remember the copies of the evidence I had the private investigator compile? He took the initiative to find out where the wives worked. They both traveled extensively, but they did have home offices. They would work out of sometimes. Well, I sent packages to both of the wives through FedEx overnight, giving them an insight into what their husbands were up to when they left. I never heard back from the wives of the husbands, but I did find out that my ex-wife's business was faltering. Apparently the wives made a couple of bad Google and Yelp reviews as to what happened. I don't personally know if that had any effect. I went back to my attorney and filed a lawsuit against both husbands. My wife was cheating with in Mississippi. They have this alienation of affection law. Never even heard of it. But once I found out what it was, I was all in. I don't really know if I will get anything. The most that would happen is I would get a judgment, and that's about it. It's highly unlikely they will pay after everything was said and done. I changed my number and only gave it to my father and a few friends. Tony. Thank you for letting me share my story.